All right, we got well, I wouldn't say a hot debate, but we have a debate that's kind of talking about reparations. So I kind of wanted to get your guys' thoughts and opinions on it. So we know that the blacks were captured from Africa and brought to America and basically placed in slavery, and they were abused and stuff like that. But now, shoot, it's like 100 years later, and now people want to bring up slavery like generations and generations later. And so now, what should we do about it? And should those people be compensated? Now we know that the Jews that had suffered atrocities in Europe are still currently being compensated. Even people that weren't in concentration camps are being compensated for what happened there. We know the Japanese were compensated, for when their property was stolen during World War II, and of course the Native American was also compensated when their land was stolen. They were given reparations in the form of land reservations. But I was also thinking too, though, like, I mean, if you look at these people right here, I mean, if you were taken from Africa, I mean, you should probably be sent back to Africa. That would make the most logical sense. How can you have reparations in the United States when the United States is not your native home? You know, I think compensation for African Americans would be like maybe give them like, I don't know, $250,000 and return the ones that want to go back to Africa. So somebody made a video here. It says calculating the cost of slavery, and they came up with some number about 600 and, or I mean, it was like between 3.7 trillion and 6 trillion. So it's not no 59 trillion, but 6.4 trillion divided by 40 million African Americans will be about $160,000 per each African American. And so it says, I was getting that number from this number right here. I don't know who the New Republic is, but then you got to factor in like who would pay it, because it kind of wouldn't be fair to make the Anglo Americans, pay tax dollars for something that they weren't really involved in. Because a lot of Europeans that are here are migrants, and it wouldn't be fair to make, Arab and African and European migrants pay for something that they had nothing to do with. But we know that the United States does actually have a GDP of over, what is it, like, up now it's about $23.2 trillion. You know what I'm saying? Some countries don't even have 1 trillion. So America has a lot of wealth. And so I think they could afford to fork over 6.4 trillion just one time to compensate the blacks' hurt feelings about slavery. And of course, once the blacks get paid, we don't want to hear about, unfairness ever again, because that debt would be paid. Uh, I think about somewhere between 150,000 and 250 sounds about right. And so I don't know if that 150,000 would go towards, like, say, the head of the household, and he would divide that up amongst his family members if he wanted to, or would it go to every man, woman, and child? Because people are constantly having children, and like people would have to be like constantly added to the list, and so it'd be tricky because there's just so many people, and people are always being born, people are always dying, and but uh, kind of one cool thing that kind of helps though too with this reparations decision too is that, like, I personally went to African ancestry, or not African ancestry, but I just went to regular ancestry.com and did my DNA test, and it said I was about 80% Nigerian Yoruba. Weirdly, I was 13% Northern European, like Swedish. It was kind of odd. So I'd be related to like Gustav, the UFC fighter. Um, it was 4% Arab Egyptian. Maybe I was involved in like the Islamic slave trade. Maybe I'll get some money from them too. And then the rest of it was just a mix up of Italian and other little like various hunter gatherer tribes or whatever. But the cool thing about the ancestry DNA thing is that it shows a very clear trail. I'm talking about just me specifically, how I like was taken from Africa and wound up in the southern states, and then from the southern states I wound up in the northern states. I mean, there's a clear line. So I mean, I would definitely 100% be guaranteed reparations, plus like all the stuff I've suffered through, job loss and being blocked from education, and the wreckage of the family, structure, and blacks who have absent fathers, and discrimination and racism and police shootings and fires and burnings and church bombings, and blacks been through hell, rapings, lynchings, you name it, they've been through it, and they're still going through it. And so maybe even maybe even that 150,000 to 250,000 would just be the start of rebuilding reparations, because you got to remember, like, not only is there a wealth gap that exists between black Americans and other people, but there's an intellectual gap too, caused by during slavery, when the blacks were basically not allowed to read anything but the Bible, or if they were allowed to read at all. And so while the rest of the world was kind of educating themselves in literate world, in literate countries, the black had to, if blacks were 400 or 300 or 500 years in bondage without any kind of literacy, or they'd be punished if they tried to become literate, they'd have to be bare minimum 300 to 500 years behind any country that had a solid educational program, what I'm saying, where people could just educate themselves generation after generation after generation. It'd have to be at least a 300-year gap. So if slavery started in like the 1500s, right? And then I would assume that 15 to the year 2000 is what? I don't know how many years is that? 500 years? So if Europe was literate from the 1500s to like the year 2000, well, not the year 2000, but like the 1800s is when slavery ended. So we'll say about 400 years. And the black was basically, and I don't even know if they were literate in Africa when the European got them. So they might have just never been literate. And then when they were in the United States, they were just basically blocked from being literate. So it could be thousands of years without education. And maybe that explains some of the crass behavior that goes on in the black neighborhoods, and the dysfunction, and just the lack of understanding what goes on in the world and how the world works. I mean, so if you're talking to a black person, you're basically talking to someone that's like 400 years old. And so if you can't reason with them, boy, you wouldn't be able to reason with the European from 400 years, that was 400 years old, because I think that period was, when they were kind of in the dark ages, they weren't very literate either, especially amongst the peasant classes, the working classes weren't very literate. They believed in like ghosts and fairies and spirits and trolls and demons and angels and goblins and stuff like that. And, they had short lifespans, and, diseased, ravaged Europe the same way it ravages Africa today with malaria. They had yellow fever in Europe. And so, without education, people are backward people. I mean, they can seem like they're kind of crazy and wicked and corrupt, but really it's due to a lack of education. That's why, like, if you go on any university campus, people generally don't act really crazy, because the education kind of keeps your behavior in check. Now, of course, the students, they'll go out and get drunk and act crazy, and and they're young, of course, so they'll do that. But like, it's nothing like being in a poor neighborhood in a hostile environment. It's a completely different level of human behavior in terms of negativity. Now let's ask me the question: what do I think? Do I think blacks should get reparations for slavery? Yeah, But I actually think blacks should get their reparations for slavery in Africa. I think because African Americans solemnly believe that the African nations sold them, like Senegal, Gambia, Mali, Ghana, Nigeria. I mean, you take your pick. So if they sold us, what I would like personally, because I'm supposedly Nigerian, I would like 250,000 and 1 acre in Africa, either Nigeria or Ghana. I mean, my DNA traces back to Nigeria, but Nigeria can be a hostile environment. I mean, but I'll take what I can get. You know what I'm saying? If the Nigerian government gave me 1 acre, I'll take it. Why not? I just use some of my 250,000 to buy some palm plants and some palm trees and create me one of them little hammocks and swing in my hammock. Give me a little banana tree, grow me a little garden, and I'll just relax. Maybe get some free energy technology, maybe some green technology. Get me a little Nigerian girl, keep me company, and I'll be straight. So yeah. Also, too, I did a video earlier about Bernie Sanders. He basically gave a strong no on reparations, which means he pretty much lost the black vote. I mean, he has okay, so he has to go up against all these Republicans, and he's hardly going to get any minority votes. And unless blacks are crazy, he's not going to get any black vote, which is at least if there's 40 million blacks, 40 to 60 million blacks in America, he lost about 40 million of them, 35 million black votes. No saying, because blacks right now are going all over the internet and telling themselves not to vote for Bernie Sanders. And so if Hillary is trying to run again too, she probably doesn't want to put Bernie Sanders on her ticket. And so the only person that's really left that is a competent Democrat would be that what's that guy's name? Kobe or something like that. I can't remember his name. But he's the kind of the guy that helped Obama with his campaign slogan. Another biracial guy. But he's not even for reparations. And so, I mean, and he's a Democrat. I mean, not that that matters, but so I don't know. I mean, the thing is, like, I don't think the president gives reparations anyway. You know what I'm saying? Like, really, you'd have to take like the United States corporation to court, and then the court would, decide amongst itself, maybe through Congress or something like that. They would decide as to whether or not African Americans would receive reparations for slavery or not. You can't really like partition the president because the president is a human being with his own personal feelings about things. And from some of these presidents' perspective, like giving blacks reparations doesn't really benefit their campaign platform. In essence, look at it this way: if blacks were brought over here to serve as slave and they were property of the United States with no rights, why would you give your property reparations? See, that would be like you bought chickens and you want to give the eggs reparations because you ate the chicken that laid the eggs. But the little chicks that come out the eggs, you want to give them reparations. But the chicken is your food. See, so somebody would think you were crazy for thinking like that. And so it's the same thing with slavery. During slavery, blacks were not even viewed as human. They were viewed as cattle in some circumstances, less than cattle. They were hunted, they were castrated, they were lynched, they were burned, they were maimed. If you tried to run, you had your feet severed off. They were raped, just like I have. Well, I don't know if my ancestors were raped or not because mine is like Northern European, and I don't think there was a lot of Northern Europeans here in the 1500s, 1600s. So I don't know how that happened, but other people were raped. And so, given all these circumstances, I mean, what do we do? Do we give people a check for 150,000 and president gets on this podium and says, sorry guys, the United States was a little bit too aggressive in its policies, or does the United States say, you know what, we brought you here as slaves and you guys are still as slaves, and so because we still think of you as slaves, we're not going to compensate you, um, which would make sense to me because uh, I don't understand like why Bernie Sanders would not want blacks to have reparations. He's just like, well, look at the economic conditions. We can just kind of fight poverty and we can kind of fight, social injustice. But blacks have been doing that. They can do that on their own. There are blacks that are slowly but surely pushing towards education. There are blacks that are pushing towards economic reform. Uh, I mean, they're kind of doing better than they've ever been doing. If you look at this young generation, they don't have to go through the things that their parents and grandparents went through with like Jim Crow and the civil rights struggle and abuses that the blacks went through. So they got a little bit better. But like I said, if you still walk downtown in your local city, I don't know where you're from if you're listening to this, but you can clearly see a lot of, blacks that just look downtrodden walking around the city. Some of them are begging for money, and there's still hoods, you know, ghettos or poor places where black people live, and it's definitely not equal. And I don't think that's ever going to change, especially with modern gentrification right now, where certain groups of people are moving into certain areas and territories. Those certain groups of people are buying up property and real estate and houses and apartments and skyrocketing those properties uh, and making it only affordable to the very elite. And if you don't work like 10-hour days, 5 days a week, you won't be able to afford to live there. And they're cutting down on Section 8 housing. Even if you have a Section 8 voucher, it's hard to find a place now that rents out Section 8 because, like I said, lack of education causes negative behavior. And so, because the blacks didn't have education, they became terrorists in their own neighborhood, and that stopped property owner. That kind of put a bad taste in owners' mouths who thought they would be able to make a easy check by renting out government subsidies, and now they're like, well, it's not really worth it. I'd rather just have this old house and put 50,000 into it and make it a little bit nicer and rent to students and families and individuals. And I had a little bit less hassle. I mean, you're always going to get something, but it's not going to be just all out violence and shooting and chaos. And then, when the people that are on these subsidies move out, the property is half destroyed, and after, all the money that I did make, I got to put right smack back into the house for all these repairs so I can rent it out to someone else. And so now, even if you have a Section 8 voucher, it's hard to find Section 8 housing in a good area, and even in bad areas, it's still all right, but um, it's not like it was. And so there's a gap there. There's an educational gap. If blacks were in bondage for 400 years without literacy, there's an education gap. And Bernie Sanders, I don't know how he thinks he's going to fix that without money, because the whole country is predicated off, runs off money. And Bernie Sanders is like, oh, we're just going to fix it. But I don't think he really cares. I think Bernie Sanders has a completely different agenda. I think he just wants to fight Republicans. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's the descendants of those Jacobins out of France. And he's just like, I just want to fight Republicans, and push democratic policies and liberalism and socialism. He doesn't really care about like blacks. And he's not supposed to. It's not his job. Blacks' job is to care about blacks. Everybody's job is to care about their people, you know? Um, and so when you're dealing with someone like Bernie Sanders, you can't rationalize or negotiate with this guy when he comes out like, no, they don't. But he never really offers any solutions. But would monetary compensation kind of solve the problem? Would monetary compensation fill those gaps? Hmm. I don't know. I don't even think that would. I think even if you gave every black man, woman, and child 150,000, between 150,000 and 250,000, I still don't think it would close the educational gap. And it would only shrink the economic gap by like maybe 2 to 3%. Because you got to remember, if a lot of that money is used to pay off like debts and school loans and what's that other stuff? When people get pregnant and they got to pay child support and alimony. Shoot, you might be looking at about, and then taxes, you might be just looking at about maybe 75,000 after it's all said and done. And then if you do want to go back to school, that's another, who knows how much that is out of that check, and then you don't really have too much left. And that's even if you have a mindset to even want to use whatever is left out of your money to go back to school or develop some sort of a small business or just have that extra cash for emergencies. Or if you just want to buy like a new car or something crazy, buy a $50,000 car and only have 25,000 left in cash to impress some girl or guy. So but the thing is that what someone does with their money is really their own personal business. And so just like when the Japanese were compensated during World War II when their property was stolen, each Japanese person was given about 20,000, but they weren't told like how they should spend it. And it's the same with the Native Americans. Like they were given these small, plots of land, but they weren't really told like how, or what to do with it. And I think if you're Native American, if you have a certain percentage of Native American DNA, you actually get free education. So blacks, I think in order to truly slice into what blacks call racism, you probably have to compensate them 150,000 to 250,000, depending on the severity of each case, and maybe like 4 years free college, or at least 2 years free college. I'd say 2 years free college. Maybe 2 years free college at your local community college would be good. Even if you messed up at your community college, the government will basically just reinstate you. You get like a last chance thing. They say you get, this is your amount. This should cover all your textbooks and pencils and pads and all that other stuff. You know, and you get another chance. Even if you failed. Um, and so if you pass your classes with a certain grade point average, you get 2 years of community college. 4 years will be the most optimal. Um, but that could be a bit much, unless the alumni were really donating to their local universities and pumping a lot of money into that. It might be hard to kind of find the funding for 4 years. Maybe, I don't know. United States has a GDP of like 21.5 trillion or something like that. And if they gave the blacks 6.4 trillion, plus another maybe 2.1 trillion to cover educational costs, um, it could be done. The United States would just have to take a momentary economic hit, to kind of boost these blacks up. Because if the blacks are citizens, then they ought to be treated equally, fairly, and with dignity and respect, and they should be compensated because the compensation would show the black that they are a part of the United States and that they are indeed human beings after all. And I think to not compensate black people is basically, like Bernie Sanders said, is to basically say that they're not human. Like I said, that would be like a farmer compensating his uh, cow when he's trying to use the cow for milk and meat. And he's like compensating the calf and giving the calf like 100,000, dollars, something like that, giving an animal. So it'll be interesting debate. Uh, I mean, do I think I personally, I'm black, by the way. Do I think I personally need reparations? Mm, of course. Who's going to turn down free money? I mean, if people play like scratch off tickets and Powerball and Mega Millions, like, you know, 150,000 would be like hitting the Fantasy Five to me, or going to the casino and hitting one of their, you know, how they have their little monthly super jackpots every like 3 to 6 months. It'd be like going to, why would I go to the casino and be able to win 150,000 to 250,000 and say, no, I'm not going to play that game. It's against my moral standards. I'm just going to like go home and like not have any money. No, I would love to go to the casino and win 150,000. I would love for the government to give me 150,000. I would like the government to give me 250,000 and 1 acre in Africa. And I would like for the African government to grant me dual citizenship. That would be total compensation. I would forgive racism and everything. I would have no more problems. If I was given 250K and an acre in the African country of my choice, that would be cool. Uh, that would be awesome. But I don't know what you guys think about it. But if anybody stumbles into this video by accident and you powered your way through it and listened to me, leave a comment, like, and subscribe. I enjoy all comments. I respond to all comments. I don't care how rich I get. I respond to everybody because I like and love everybody. Everybody's cool in their own way. Um, yeah, and I'll be making more videos. Until then, peace.